Hi folks, Robert Lowell Goller here. Thank you for joining us for our weekly chats about local history. Now, did Adolf Hitler visit East Aurora? That is a big question that's been part of our local lore, and if you believe this story, he looked like this in 1931. This is actually how he looked in 1931. But this, according to a local story, he was in East Aurora around the time of this photograph of him in 1931, and it has been part of our local lore for quite some time. And someone had actually asked me about it a couple years ago. So I got to the bottom of it. A couple other researchers have tried to do the same thing. According to the story, Adolf Hitler signed a guest book at a boarding house, a little hotel on Main Street, in September of 1931, September 6, 1931 to be exact. And the reason this story got a lot of attention was, in addition to the fact that it was Adolf Hitler, but it wasn't when he visited, supposedly, that the story came out. It was a decade later. So a woman named Gertrude Peek had opened a boarding house. She called it an inn, but it was more of the size of a boarding house, and she actually lived there, bed and breakfast boarding house. Now, previous historical accounts have placed that at 411 Main Street, which is the big house that's now got offices in it, including, I believe, our state assemblyman's office is still in there, at 411 Main Street, and it's a big house. Well, that was owned by Christopher Peek, and it was often called the Peek House. But looking through property records and phone books, I was able to find out that that wasn't the house that the Peek Inn was located in. It was actually on the southwest corner of Main and Walnut Streets. Thank goodness for phone books. That Gertrude Peek, who was a widow, had opened in the 1920s, had opened her inn at that house at the corner, which still stands. I believe it's a private residence today, on the southwest corner of Main and Walnut Streets. So she opens this in, and it was kind of neat. I didn't put this in an article that I wrote about this last month for my monthly newspaper column, but she had a little play on words. So her last name was Peek. She was a relative, I believe, of by marriage to Christopher Peek of that other house. She said, take a peek in, come by, peek in the Peek Inn. And so she encouraged people to come visit and take a peek. And so she did a play on words with her name. So what happened? She ran this inn for about a decade. But what ended up happening is Adolf Hitler invades Poland, becomes in the news. He's very much so in the news after the outbreak of World War II. He invades Poland, and we start talking about him more, the United States, and he becomes more important on the world stage, Adolf Hitler. Well, Gertrude Peek remembers, supposedly, a visit by someone who looks an awful lot like Adolf Hitler. She sees his picture in the newspaper, and we wouldn't have had television at that point, so any imagery of him she would have seen from the newspaper, and she recognizes him. She goes back into the visitor logs of her old boarding house, of her old inn at Main and Walnut, and because she swears that she remembers a man that looks like him visiting the inn. And she finds in an entry on September 6, 1931, a entry for A. Hitler, A. period Hitler. And so she starts talking about it. Now, mind you, this is a decade later. So in the spring of 1940 is when she is talking about this. And she calls the Buffalo, or they call her, somehow the story gets out, Buffalo media. And the newspapers interview her about this entry in this journal, or in this guest log for A. Hitler. She tells the newspapers, and I was able to dig out the old newspaper articles and try to get to the bottom of this local legend. There was actual newspaper coverage of this, but not when Adolf Hitler visited in 1931 about almost a decade later, 9 years, 10 years later. And it says she swears that it said A Hitler Berlin, and they include this an image of this signature with the newspaper articles. And she tells the newspapers that she had not really quite sure of the circumstances of that signature. It didn't really have significance at the time. But when I saw his picture, she said, the register confirmed my belief that Adolf Hitler had been a guest at the Peek Inn. So her memory, and then she goes back to the date and finds the signature. Well, according to her, Adolf Hitler and his had attempted to stay at the Roycroft Inn first, and not finding room at the inn, went over to her little hotel, her little inn at Main and Walnut Streets. So that's how he ended up there, that he had tried to go to the Roycroft Inn. The newspapers, and she swears that this was Adolf Hitler. She won't let anyone tell her otherwise, according to the newspaper accounts. And she talks to the Buffalo Evening News. She talks to the Polish Everybody's Daily newspaper in Buffalo. And of course, that newspaper would be interested because Hitler had invaded Poland, and so they were covering the war. And they immediately have skepticism about this story. And one of the biggest issues is that Adolf Hitler comes alone. He signs in alone, and Mrs. Peek brushes that aside, saying, oh, his entourage must have stayed somewhere else in town, and he stayed at my inn, while the rest of the folks didn't sign in at my inn because they went somewhere else. So that's suspicion number one. Suspicion number two, hole in the story number two, is that Adolf Hitler was not a nobody in 1931. It would be easy to say, oh, this was before World War II, before he was famous, so he could have come to East Aurora and stayed unnoticed. Unfortunately, for the story, he was very well known in Germany. Actually, at the time, he was part of the government that was trying to consolidate, or he was working toward running for office to become part of the government and to take over Germany, even in 1931. So he would have not had time to come to East Aurora. And remember, back then, you would have had to take probably a ship over the Atlantic. It would not have been something where you would fly like you do today to get here. Taken a train to Buffalo, then to East Aurora, and then stayed here unnoticed. And given his stature in Germany at the time, and the fact it would have taken him some time to get here, the idea that he would have been staying here in East Aurora is very far-fetched. He's very he's the newspapers in 1940 that were covering this story had said that they documented him, and it can be documented that he was in Germany at the time. So he wouldn't have been able to sneak away for even a couple days and get back to Germany. It just doesn't make any sense. Was this... we don't know. I don't have the original access to the original guest log. I would love to see it to compare it to the entries around it. But the A. Hitler signature that was included, the Buffalo newspapers included an image of this signature, bears absolutely no resemblance to the real Adolf Hitler signature. So that's another reason why that story is very unbelievable, is that the signature does not match, and he signed it just A. Hitler, and it actually looks like a child wrote it, and written in crayon or pencil. It's not really, it's not in ink or anything. It appears to be in the guest registry of the Peek Inn at Main and Walnut. So the newspapers, the Buffalo newspapers, were quick to point out that this story probably was not true. Then why did they cover it? Well, interestingly, the East Aurora Advertiser did not mention it at all. I went through the East Aurora Advertisers around the same time, and the local newspaper probably figured, oh, this story is not really believable. We're not going to waste our time covering it. But just like today, you see like TV news programs or daily newspapers often will look for a story, a talker, things that people are talking about, and this story would have absolutely been what we would call in the newspaper business a talker, where people would be talking about it. Did Adolf Hitler visit East Aurora? And I did that sort of in the headline of this video today. The live stream today is to not answer the question right away. So you would be intrigued by it. And the same thing the newspapers would do, and the same thing they do today. So the fact that not the fact that Adolf Hitler visited East Aurora, which he didn't, I can pretty much say that without hesitation. That wasn't the story, whether Adolf Hitler visited East Aurora. It was the fact that this innkeeper was claiming that Adolf Hitler visited East Aurora. And given that Adolf Hitler was in the news in 1940, as the United States was about to enter a year and a half later World War II, but World War II was definitely happening in Europe at the time, and people were talking about Adolf Hitler. Any article, any story like this would lend itself to an article in the Buffalo News, and even though it wasn't true. And so the newspapers were careful to mention in the last paragraphs that the story wasn't true, but the headlines would have gotten people to read and to talk about it. Was it true? Even though there's evidence against it, could Adolf Hitler have possibly visited East Aurora? And given his stature and fame at the time, it would have been a very interesting question to ask, and people would have been talking about it. It would have been very intriguing. And so that's the reason the newspapers covered it, not necessarily because it had any validity. And it's interesting because no matter how much evidence was against the fact that Adolf Hitler could have visited in September of 1931, Mrs. Peake just kept trying to come up with reasons why some of that evidence wasn't true, which sounds familiar, right? With some of the things that go on with our politics and news today. That all this evidence, you look at the record, and you still have someone insisting that this event could have actually happened. So Adolf Hitler was nowhere near East Aurora in September of 1931. The Buffalo News even mentioned that he was in Germany at the time, and that Polish newspaper it said that it must have been a joke, is how they characterized it in 1940, that the signature in 1931 could have been a joke. And who knows, Mrs. Persons might have just put that entry in there herself. Who knows? It's interesting that someone would have signed A. Hitler back in 1931, even though Hitler was in Germany and prominent in German politics. I don't imagine it was something that someone would, a name that someone would use in 1931 as a trick in the visitor log. So it doesn't make sense. So I'm tempted to think that maybe Mrs. Persons, dare I say, may have forged the signature herself. I do not know, but it has become part of local lore, and I wanted to get to the bottom of it. A couple other people have done the same, tried to do the same. At least one other person has looked into it. Mike Kelly, who had used to do the local lore cartoons. He looked into it a little bit, and I delved deeper into because I write, and he drew local lore cartoons, so he had fewer words to work with. I wanted to dig deep into the sources, so that's what I did recently, because I was intrigued by this story. This wasn't the first time, as I noted in the article that I wrote, that I will be including in an upcoming book, most likely, because it is an intriguing story. This wasn't the first time that a forged or signature was in a local hotel's registry. As I had written a while back and talked about on the live streams, is that there was an entry for Grover Cleveland of New York in the Globe Hotel Register on November 2nd of 1890. And same that I did here with the Hitler visit, with the delving into the articles and the documented places where these folks were. Same that Hitler could not be in East Aurora at that time. Grover Cleveland was supposedly signed into the Globe Hotel on November 2nd of 1890, but newspaper reports, his itinerary, have him in New York City. He even voted in New York City the next day. So the chances that he was in East Aurora. So either someone put Grover Cleveland's name into the Globe Hotel's register, or it was done later. It could have. But we have the actual register that is in line. So it probably was a joke at the time in 1890. But that's Grover Cleveland certainly visited the Globe Hotel, but not on that date, and that has perpetuated a local legend that Grover Cleveland came in between his presidential terms to the Globe Hotel. So this whole signature of Adolf Hitler in a local, a famous person's signature in a local hotel's register is not unprecedented, but in most cases, I'm a very skeptical person, and as proven through the research, the skepticism was well founded. So, to answer the question, Adolf Hitler probably did not visit East Aurora, despite the local legend that says he did. So, thank you for joining me for our weekly chats about local history. As always, thanks for keeping history alive. If you have any ideas or questions, comments, please put them in the comments or send me a private message as you do. Particularly with the subjects that have been pretty popular and intriguing. I am going to take the show on the road in the coming weeks because the weather's getting nicer and it's easier to do than it was in the wintertime. I have been getting some questions. Facebook is now taking live videos down, and there doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason to it. Some videos are coming down, others are remaining up for months and months and months. If you want to see all the videos, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. It's Robert Lowell Goller. Just search for the name under YouTube, and you can see all the previous videos that I post. So if Facebook fails you and you're looking for something we've chatted about before, take a look there. Again, I'm Robert Lowell Goller. I'm the Town and Village Historian, but these videos and a lot of my research are not officially connected with my official duties as Town and Village Historian. Thanks as always. We'll see you next time.